We are very fortunate to have another local talent here today, as our theme for this semester has been local talent. Catherine Rees is here today. Catherine works for RCAP Solutions. I'm sure she'll tell you more about it, but she does a lot of work with rural community water systems. Catherine has been living in Alfred since 1987. Got a master's and bachelor of science, bachelor in environmental science, master's in environmental health from the University of Pittsburgh, right? Yep. And I'm just going to turn it over to her. At the end, we'll take questions from the room first, and then we'll take questions from Zoom. And I think it's probably best for Zoom people to put their questions on chat, and we'll go from there. So I'll turn it over to Catherine.
Hi, thank you. Welcome. I'm Catherine Rees, as I've already been introduced, and I want to add a little bit about my background, because some of you may have known that I worked, I had a office in Alfred next to, can you hear me okay? Okay. Yeah. I had an office in Alfred for 12 years next to the old kinfolk. And so if anybody read my bio, it said that I came back to RCAP Solutions. And so I thought I might address why I left RCAP Solutions, because I really do love this job, and I wanted to take a minute to explain that. And it might help if I show you this map. So RCAP Solutions, it covers the whole northeastern United States. We're part of this national network called the Rural Community Assistance Partnership. So when I was working previously with RCAP Solutions, we had laid off staff in every state except New York. And I kind of saw the writing on the wall, and an opening became available at New York State Department of Health. And so, as Michelle mentioned, my background is also environmental health, and I took the opportunity to change jobs. Well, in that 10 years that I worked for the health department, they never replaced me. In addition, they laid off somebody else in New York State. So by the time I heard that they were hiring again 3 years ago, I said to my colleague, who I had kept in touch with at RCAP Solutions, I said, "You mean my old job?" And she said, "You'd come back?" And I said, "Oh yeah." And I just wanted to add that, because not only working for the health department, you'll learn some things about why that helped me coming back to RCAP Solutions, but as well as not thinking that I left because I didn't like it. I loved it. I've always loved it, and I'm glad to be back. So our network, as I mentioned, it's a national network. We're federally funded. And the criteria for the communities I work with is they have to be small, they have to be rural, and they have to be low income. And we basically help them go from the planning stage to the implementation of water, wastewater, and solid waste projects. Although personally, I don't work on solid waste. We have one person in our network in the Northeast that's working on solid waste, but it is part of the national goals that we do. We're mostly federally funded from Department of Health and Human Services, USDA Rural Development, and the EPA, and various levels of grants from each of those. Some of the states do have state funding as well, and I'll talk at the end about a little a new initiative that we have from a private foundation too. So what we do is provide technical assistance and training to communities, and it's usually on site. Prior to COVID, I would go to the communities. The little office I had in Alfred was basically a workspace. I went to the communities, I met with the communities, I worked with them on one-on-one. As well as the training was always, usually was in an in-person setting, but now it's been mostly remote. My title is Water Resource Specialist, but across the network, across the nation, we're called technical assistance providers. And the best part is our services are at no cost. So the communities really appreciate what we're able to provide for them. And our backgrounds is, I'm in environmental science, we have engineers, we have planners, we have chemists, we have some operators on staff, geologists, as well as we have a GIS specialist. So we're looking to hire another one too. It's hard. Another air with the mask. It's hard to talk. So before I go on, I want to ask, and I guess I don't know if I'll be able to see the answers in Zoom, but I can probably look at them later. So go ahead and answer in Zoom too. First of all, I want to know how many people pay a water bill? Most people pay. I know, Lou, you're still in a private well. That's important because I'm going to talk a little bit about wells as well. But I wanted to I'm going to throw in some photos from different things that we work on. This is a water tank, and this is one in construction. I'm the kind of person that when I'm driving around the countryside, I look, I see, I notice water tanks all over the place. I don't know if everybody's like that, probably not. But does anybody know where the water tanks are in the village of Alfred? Okay, the ex-mayor knows, another ex-mayor knows. Anybody else? Oh, good, good. So water tanks are generally very high up in the terrain because water is pumped up to them and then gravity flows down. And so actually in the village, there's one on each side of the valley. So you might want to look around and see if you can see those next time. Here's one that's finished. This is a little treatment building here. This is fairly small, so it's probably just for disinfecting the water. I'll show some more pictures of a little bit more elaborate treatment, which would be a much larger structure. So how do we get started? Typical services that we do, are we get started with what's your need? People call me and they say, well, we're looking to do something and we don't know exactly, do we need water? Do we need wastewater? And so right now I actually have 2 surveys going on where we're asking, it's a situation where the town doesn't have water or sewer services, like most of you here that are paying water bills, but they have complaints from the residents. Our wells are running dry, or there's a lot of odor in them. And so we do a survey to find out more details about the problems. Does your water run out? Does it make you sick? Have you had it tested? Lots of different types of questions. And then the big question is, are you interested? And so it's not only finding out the need, but it's also finding out the interest from the residents. So a big part of what I do, though, is in this planning process, I have a really good working relationship with the engineering consultants, with the regulators, of which I used to be one, and the funding agencies that are funding these large projects for these small communities. So I help them, talk about the options. I help them hire engineers and other professionals, sometimes with fiscal advisors or bond counsel, specialized attorneys that they need in order to be able to borrow money. I help them decide what method they might want to use for district formation. It's a legal process, but I can at least, I've been through it enough that I can describe the process to them in a way sometimes that they understand better than the attorneys explaining it to them, quite frankly. So this is an example of a needs assessment. This was an area that didn't have sewage treatment. And so the people had on-site individual septic systems. And these pictures were actually taken by the local health department. They were responding to a complaint from a neighbor. So the health department does not regulate individual septic systems unless they're failing or individual wells. So what they do is they put this bright colored dye in the toilet or in the sink in the home, and then they flush it, and then they wait a while and they walk around the neighborhood and see what they can see. And in this case, it was pretty easy because they could actually see the pipe. Sometimes it's just seeping out of the ground. But in this case, it's a pipe, and this dye that was, put in this person's house and flushed the toilet is now coming out into the environment. And this is looking back down on it. So here's the pipe, here's the dye, here's the water in the ditch, which actually I think is frozen right now, but within a block, it goes right into a stream. So that was this was really great documentation indeed in this case. So that's the kind of things we look at. Some other, what probably everyone remembers in the projects that I work with is the funding. I help with a lot of funding applications. We help document their eligibility, and that's really what a lot of what I'm doing, especially right now, because we have a big deadline, November 22nd, but it's ongoing. It's all year round. There's always applications that are due. And we also then, once a community does a project, we help them with the rate setting, or sometimes it's just an older system that, hasn't maybe raised rates in a while. That's another service that we do. And obviously, being a past regulator, I help them understand the regulations, and I help with knowing what those regulations, what they might be in violation of, which I can help document need by that as well. Asset management is something that we do a lot of training on. We try to get communities to think about their assets, to inventory what they have, document what, when are they going to need to fix those assets. And so that's a big, and how much money they need to put away to repair those. We have some GIS specialists that does system mapping, and then emergency response plans, vulnerability assessments. Every small system, water or wastewater, really needs to be planning for emergencies and determining what the vulnerabilities of those systems are. So most of what I do is community projects where I'm working with municipal and community leaders, but we also work with the stakeholders, which are the people that are paying the bills or the businesses. So I do a lot of organizing and facilitating public meetings to get information about the project or what the concerns are. A public meeting as a result of the surveys that we've done. We have a special funding from USDA Rural Development. The title of the workshop is called Workshop in a Box. It's really about sustainable management. We bring leaders together for a day. They review 10 key management areas, and then they pick one that they're going to focus on and develop an improvement plan and actually an action plan, which we follow up on. What are you going to do in 6 weeks? What are you going to do in 6 months? And so on. But the most training that we probably do is with operators for water and wastewater systems. Operators for wastewater systems have to have continuing education credits in order to renew their licenses. Every 3 years, they renew their licenses. So there's a huge demand on them to get training in order to be able to renew their licenses. And we provide it to them at no cost, which is a huge benefit to them. And then we partner sometimes with the American Water Works Association, which is even better. We have a joint grant with them. And what they do is they do all the advertising. They get the courses accredited by the regulators. They bring the food, and we just show up and do the training. So we really like that partnership a lot. We also do some, and we've just done a couple of these for a town that had wells and septic systems. And we did a couple evening trainings on, taking care of your septic systems, information about your wells. There's a program called privatewellclass.org, which is part of the University of Illinois private well program. And so we've done a couple of those, specifically geared to homeowners. But the other thing that we do with homeowners, and this is another small grant from EPA to do private well assessments. And because of my background with the health department, that's why I wanted to bring that up. You know, I spent 10 years doing sanitary surveys of public wells. Well, a well is a well. I know what to look for. I know what the problems are. And so it's a small part of what I do, but I really enjoy it because the homeowners are very appreciative, just like the communities are appreciative. And it's great to just go out and meet one-on-one and help people that are having issues with the private wells. I'll show you some examples of that in a second. But I wanted to also mention the legislators. We also, well, again, prior to COVID, we used to go to Washington and we used to meet with our representatives and talk about nationally, what are we doing as an agency? You know, obviously we're federally funded, so we're asking for certain, you know, we're always asking for money, but we really want them to know what the impact has been. How many millions of dollars have we brought in to these communities through the services that we provide at no cost, and that we can provide at no cost because of the federal funding that we receive. And what I tell the people in the communities is, you know, it's your tax dollars coming back to the rural areas, because really they don't see it as much as the cities and the big metropolitan areas. So I wanted to share a little bit about the private well assessments. I know, you know, maybe there's more people out there on Zoom that have private wells, but this is a well. Okay, this is the casing, and all wells have what we call a conduit, which connects the power from the house over here up through the conduit and into the well and down into the pump. It's a submersible pump inside the well. Well, the problem with this, and I see this quite often, is this area right here where you know, there's threads here, but it's not connected to the well. So when you look at it from a small animal or an insect perspective, looking back up into that hole, there's a big hole here. And insects, animals, small animals like mice, you know, can get up in there, and there's a direct conduit into the well. In fact, we've had a couple of cases where we took the well cap off, and sometimes those wires, there's a little extra wires, and they're sort of bunched up there in front of, right inside the well, and we found mouse nests. However, we didn't find a mouse in the nest. So we don't know, did the mouse fall down into the well, 60, 100 feet down into the well, or did it just happen to not be there when we opened the lid, you know? And so it's a real and easy fix that we discovered. And this, I want to show you that this shows you a little bit better. This is an upside down well cap, but you can see this is where the conduit would have come in, and you can see how there's an opening here, which then would have gone into the into the well. And why this isn't sanitary is the well casings are steel, heavy steel, and they're cut off at some point, you know, so many feet above the ground. And when you put this metal cap on a ragged edged cutting, it's just metal on metal, and so it's not a good tight seal. We almost always see insect type nests and things inside of there, even if the conduit is tight, because it's just not a tight seal. And so we call this a non-sanitary well cap. Whereas this, the seal is around the outside of the casing. And so that area is smooth, and that we put a gasket and create a tight seal around, you know, around your well. And then because it's tight, there are little screened vents here, screened so no insects or little critters can get in. And this is where the conduit would come in as well. The vents are on either side of the conduit. But so you don't create a vacuum. So if it's a really tight seal and you're pumping, you could create a vacuum, you know, and so that's why the better caps, which are better sealed, also have a little vent there. So the three types of projects that I generally work on with communities are if they're thinking of creating a whole new water or wastewater system. So they're going to put a well in, they're putting the tank in, they're going to do the treatment, they're going to put all the pipes in the ground, and that, or vice versa, you know, or with the wastewater system, they're going to do the treatment, the collection, and the pump stations, and all that's involved. So that's a whole new system, and I have done several of those. There are not as many left, I guess you could say, but that's one version of what I work on. The other one is extending, and I have a couple of these going on right now, where there's an existing, you know, system that has water, has a well in the tank, and they're just going to run lines out into an area that has private wells and then serve those. But so it's just an extension from an existing system, and it could be within the same community, or it could be a neighboring community. We have a lot of neighboring communities that will serve other areas because they have the capacity. But the biggest thing probably of what I do is somebody that wants to upgrade an existing system. These systems were built 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago in some cases. And so that's the bulk of the type of projects that they work on. Oh, so you can't see the title either. Can I?
If you just click on the screen,
So you sometimes you can see it, but if it's high, no, nothing. Okay, I thought it was just me, but you guys can't see the titles either. All right. Yeah. All right. So this is another example, more elaborate water treatment system. This has clarifiers and multimedia filters. And I bring this up because I recently had a mayor tell me that, you know, they're looking at an improvement project, and he had somebody in one of his customers say, well, you know, why do I have to pay for water? You know, my neighbor or my brother who lives outside the village gets free water, you know, in their well. Yeah. This is just one example of, you know, why it's not free. There's a lot involved. I showed you pictures of wells. I showed you pictures of tanks and treatment systems, the pipes in the ground. It's not free, and there's you know, tremendous costs involved in the system. But also your well is not free. I mean, we had to drill it, and we drilled the new well, thousands of dollars. We've had to replace pumps. We replaced filters. We pay electric bills. So either way, it's not a free. Water is not free. And this is just one example. This is even more elaborate. Manganese green sand filtration system. Usually if you have high manganese, you have high iron, and so this type of system removes both of those. And this is a pretty more elaborate system. So how do communities hear about us? Usually it's word of mouth. Usually it's a consultant that maybe has worked with us on another project and recommends that a community gives us a call. Somebody needs to upgrade, or they're looking at a new system. And mostly they want help getting grants and project funding. And the funniest one, since I've come back, I had a supervisor call me. I didn't know him from Adam. I never heard of him. I knew where the town was. He gave me a call, and he said, you know, I was talking to somebody at a meeting about these people that have been complaining about their wells, and I know it's they're talking about a new system, and it's a difficult process. And the person said, well, just call Catherine. You know, if anybody can do it, she can do it. That kind of word of mouth was a little scary, because it's a lot to live up to, but that's what happens. You know, people hear about us from somebody else that had a successful project, you know. And what makes us so different from consultants is we try not to do everything for them, even with the funding application. There's a lot of information that I have to gather from the municipality. We try to help them learn about the process. Even when we're hiring an engineer, you know, we help them, okay, here are maybe some questions that you can ask them when you're looking at it in the interviews, but we have them do that. We try to get them to gather as much information so that they can make informed decisions. And we don't have a vested interest because we don't charge them. And our salaries aren't based on, you know, if I help them get $1 million or I help them get $10 million, my salary is my salary. And that's not the same with a lot of consultants. Most engineers, the bigger the project, the more they make. And so the community is really, there's a lot of trust that they have, you know, with us. So when we're looking at project development, we try to get everybody together. We get the regulators, the funders right from the beginning. We look at a lot of different design options, management options, and what's going to be the difference between replacing that pipe versus fixing those leaks every year. You know, it's a balance. Do we do the project where we replace where we do replacement, or do we just keep doing what I call crisis management, you know, and just keep fixing them as they come along. These are the major funders that we help with the communities: USDA rural development, state revolving funds. Every state has a state revolving fund. Sometimes those interest rates are as low as 0% if they qualify. The community development block grant. And then in New York State, this is the deadline, November 22nd. This year in the Water Infrastructure Improvement Act, it's $400 million in funding for water and wastewater in New York State. So that sounds like a lot. It's not enough. There's going to be more applications than there is money. But the Community Development Block Grant Program this year was $20 million. So compared to that 400 million is a huge amount of money that you know, is big plus in New York State. Some of my colleagues in other parts of New England, you know, don't have that big influx of money for water and wastewater. Another thing that we do nationally, our partnership gives informational, they develop these booklets, and some of them are, you know, 1/4 inch thick, and some of them are closer to 1 inch thick, which we call the big guide. There's a big guide for community leaders, but this is one of my favorites. Getting your project to flow smoothly. So this is like, you know, helpful information that our agency also develops. Oh boy. Why is project development challenging for small communities? It really, it involves a huge commitment. A lot of the elected officials in the small communities, you know, they don't have their own town managers. There's a mayor, and there's a supervisor, there's a board, and most of the time they're part-time. And the most important thing is, you know, I mentioned how old those systems are. Well, that mayor or supervisor, in most cases, it's the first big capital project they're involved with, because the system was put in, either they don't have a system or it was put in so long ago that, you know, they might have been a little boy in the community, but they weren't, you know, they weren't involved in the process. And so they really appreciate our help in guiding them, you know, along the way. So, and the other issue is project costs rise. So I'll give you a story in a second about that. And then there's also resistance to raising rates. Some people are reelected because they say, well, we're not going to raise rates, or we're not going to raise taxes. And so I go into a community and say, well, when's the last time you raised rates? And it's been 10 years, you know, so there's a lot of resistance, political resistance in terms of raising rates. And even for regular maintenance, even for their operational maintenance, some of them aren't operating as a business like they should. You know, you have a budget. This is what you need to bring in. And they don't always bring in what they need to bring in because they need to raise rates. And then there's still places out there that don't have a system. And a lot of times it's because they voted it down in the past. So my example there was when I worked with RCAP years ago. I brought in, there was a community that didn't have municipal wastewater treatment. So they had individual septic systems. The health department cited a lot of individuals for failing septic systems. And I brought in a specialist that looks at those kind of small communities that need a lower cost solution. And so the guy came down and spent a few days in this community and, you know, measured the amount of pipe they needed and looked at, could they use the soils to, you know, a subsurface soil disposal, which is less expensive than bringing in just a little package plant to treat the waste and put it downstream. So anyway, the estimate back then was 2.5 to 3.5 million. We went to a public meeting. The engineer was there, specialist. The health department was there talking about the problems. I was there, you know, introducing everybody. People vehemently were opposed, vehemently. When I came back to RCAP, I went away for 10 years, I came back to RCAP, it was one of the first communities that called me. They wanted help. They had gotten a grant to do a study, to do a wastewater system in the community. And I said, it was all new mayor, all new board, 15 years later. And I said, well, you know, I have a little history. I was here 15 years ago, and I was at that public meeting, and I don't want to repeat that. And to talk to you, to estimate, what do you think in 15 years? Anybody have an idea of what that cost in the new engineering report estimate was? Anybody?
Twice as much?
Twice as much, okay. Well, that's a reasonable guess. How about 18.5 million? So they could have done a project 15 years earlier for 2.5 to 3.5 million. Now, and this estimate was in 2019, so it was pre-COVID when, you know, the construction costs went sky high. I mean, an engineer called me the other day and said the bids came in $1 million over than the estimate. That's what's happening now. This was 2019 was the estimate shortly after I came back. So anyway, that's an example of what happens when things aren't done when they need to be done. And the other reason that it's challenging in small communities is the economies of scale and the density. You know, we might be putting in a mile of pipe and maybe there's 100 homes. Where you do a mile of pipe in metropolitan areas or cities, and you're going to have so many more people paying, that cost of pipe is the same. You know, you just have more people paying for it. And so the rural residents almost always pay a larger share of their low income in a lot of cases for those water and wastewater services than residents in larger metropolitans or cities. And there's also fewer other social services for low income people. My agency is headquartered in Massachusetts. They have a lot of services, housing services, get back to work services that, you know, because they're in Worcester, Massachusetts, which is the second largest city in Massachusetts. And so they provide a lot of services that we just don't see in the rural areas. So funding is part of the problem, but you know, as I mentioned, in how much money we have in New York State, it's still not unlimited. There's not enough. There's more need than there is the resources. And so a lot of the projects I work in involve co-funding with multiple sources, which take a lot of time and effort. And then they're not all eligible. You know, priorities are given if it's a water system. Priorities are given if they have public health issues. If it's wastewater, you know, if it's environmental quality, like the dye that's running into the ditch, which is going into the stream. And then all the funders look at affordability and community need financially. So some of them only get loans, and they don't want to do the project if they only get a loan. They want a grant. So the other thing we help them with is partnering. Partnering can be to communities too, partnering as well. So I shared a few pictures about water systems. I wanted to share a little bit about wastewater systems, just in case you're driving around and you see anything like this, you'll say, oh, I know, that's a wastewater treatment system. Those are rotating biological contactors. They're large discs which slowly rotate in the sewage and then out. So it's aerated when it comes up out of the water. You know, so this is sort of what you're seeing is half of it. The other half is underground. How many people know where the wastewater treatment system in the village of Alfred is? Okay, not everybody though. When you flush the toilet, it goes somewhere, and there is one in the village, you know, for the village of Alfred. So you might want to keep an eye out. Here is another type of treatment. It's a trickling filter. This is this rotating arm. This goes over a media. Sometimes it's rock, sometimes it's other type of media. Again, it's aeration. The bacteria are working on the organisms in the sewage, help decompose it. I also encourage master planning. I'm working on a project and I said, oh, you know, do you have a comprehensive plan? And they said, yeah, oh yeah, we have a comprehensive plan. And I said, great, because I'm going to funding application. It would really help if you talked about this need for this water system in the comprehensive plan. Not a word. So it really needs to get on the radar with the planning committees. You know, you have to look at what's the future, what are your needs going to be, and get that into that planning document. County planning and other people can also sometimes help with that. I don't actually do comprehensive planning. That's not part of what I do, but I encourage it. I talked a little bit, see, I'm low on time. I already talked a little bit about needs assessment, but I want to point out, you know, the operators of the system generally know what some of the problems are. And here's a good example. These are the guys in the ditches. They know where the breaks have been, how many breaks you've had. You know, you need to have that discussion. I go to some communities where the operators never go to the board meetings. They don't report what's happening to the board. And the board's the one that's making the decision on whether they're going to replace those pipes in the ground or not. And then this one here on the left is interesting because this darker pipe is a sewer pipe with a crack in it. And this one with the water spraying out is a water pipe. Now, the regulations say those are supposed to be 10 vertical feet apart, but this is what the guys found when they started digging in the ditch. And so, you know, you need to talk to them. You need to find out what the situation is. I talked about this, the regulators. So for wastewater systems, the regulators are Department of Environmental Conservation. For water systems, Department of Health, and particularly Department of Health, mostly because they're more local. DEC, you know, there's one in Buffalo, there's one in Avalon, but the local health departments are countywide, or, you know, the state office that I work with, we covered 2 counties, Steuben and Schuyler. So they're more local. They're willing to come to meetings. They help describe what the problems are, and they're really good at writing letters of support for the funding applications. So I talked about this a little bit. You know, it takes a long time. There's a lot of demand, and sometimes, you know, I had a mayor that he was up for election, like keeping my fingers crossed for right in the middle of this project. He was reelected, you know, but he says, well, it's only 2 more years. And well, that's good enough for now, you know. If you can get a committee, you know, we encourage. I had a community that had a committee that would meet with me regularly. It was a little easier than having the whole board be involved with, you know, the water and wastewater issues. And then spark plugs. We use that term. I don't know if you've heard that term, but it's a person in the community that is really willing to help. And it's generally not the chief elected official in the one community that I have. It's just, you know, it is one of the trustees, but she's been there no matter what we needed. We needed help collecting more surveys, or we needed more financial information for the applications. She's just always there to help. She brings the business community together for special meetings, so those kind of people really help move projects along. So I've covered, I think, all of these things. There are advantages to the technical assistance, and the communities are really appreciative, and that's really what keeps me going every day, is the appreciation of the communities. And we are there pretty much through the life of the project. We're pretty unique in that across the country. There are some technical assistance providers that go in there and maybe help find a leak or help with the problem we have in the plant or something like that. They're in and they're out. We're really there through the life of the project, when you start thinking about it until you start design. Although there have been times when I am invited back for the ribbon cutting, because I wasn't there through the construction process, and so they do invite me back sometimes. So really, I consider myself, help with planning and a project coordinator. But I don't want to say, we don't substitute the professional engineers I work very closely with, and they're a huge asset as well. So Mark talked about this, like I said, the preliminary engineering report can't go to funding sources without them. We help them with hiring those engineers, though. We help them, determine, pay close attention to operation and maintenance costs. What I mean by that is there was one system that was proposed to have the treatment costs. So we can get funding to build the project, but we can't get funding to operate and maintain the project. And there was a situation where the cost that was presented to the community to run the system was going to double their rates. And that was if we could get 100% grant, which doesn't happen. You never get 100% grant. So we're talking about tripling the rates because the proposed design was more than what the community could afford, basically, to operate. And so we help them, look at that. How much time I have. We talked about assist with funding applications, get supporting documentation. Oh, an income survey. I didn't mention that yet. Income surveys, our agency is known across the state. Our income surveys are approved by all the funders. All the major funders use sometimes our income surveys to document two different numbers. One is the median household income, which is if you took everyone's income, like in the village of Alfred, and you put it in income order, the number right in the middle, not an average, but the number that falls in the middle is considered the median household income. And two of the major funding sources use that number to determine eligibility. And then the other one uses a percent of low and moderate income individuals. So it depends on the income based on how many people are in that household. And so here's a picture of my colleague. We help with follow-up on those surveys. You not only need to get a certain percentage, you need to get a certain percentage response rate. Otherwise, this survey is invalid. You can't use it. And so we sometimes will help with this door-to-door follow-up and getting people to complete the surveys. And we're very successful. Very few times do we not get enough surveys. We do a lot of advertising, a lot of public informational meetings to get people to respond. Talked about making operation and maintenance a priority. We encourage all communities to have a capital reserve account, putting money away for future things. Evaluate rates on an annual basis. I don't know if I mentioned, but one of the other communities that called me right after I came back, they had put in a brand new system 10 years earlier and called me and said, can you help us with our rates? And I said, oh, sure, I can do that. So, the system was already in and operating fine and everything. And I said, well, when's the last time you raised the rates? And he said, we haven't raised the rates. We put the system in, and for 10 years, we kept the rates the same. And so we really encourage people, it's a whole lot easier to raise it, 2 or 3% every year for 10 years, rather than waiting 10 years and then having to maybe double the rates. It's really hard on people's budgets. So we try to work with communities, but I was gone that 10 years, so there was no one else that they called to, help them with their rates. And a big part of what I love to do is public education on the value of water and wastewater systems. This is one of my favorite from Water Environment Federation. Water's worth it. You need water. Water needs you. And if you can get that across to people, their willingness to see that rate increase is huge. So a lot of, I go to public informational meetings. I help write press releases, information they put on Facebook. I encourage them to have an open house. This was pre-COVID, but have an open house at your treatment plant. How about a chicken barbecue there and invite everybody to come and see what the problems are and why you need to raise their rates. It doesn't always work, but we try. And the legislators I talked about, we educate them, but also they can be really crucial support for funding applications as well. So this is a summary, talked about all these things, but I want to mention one more thing. Oh, pretty good timing. One more thing. So just recently, we received a small grant from a foundation to start working on, it's too bad you can't see all the words here, for helping small businesses and entrepreneurs with education. And this again is at no cost. So here's the website here. Any of you students are thinking of opening up a business. We have self-guided online workshops and then live webinars, which aren't too much different from the workshops, but in live session, you can ask questions. And then we hired one person so far to do one-on-one consulting. So it wouldn't be me, but I'm really excited, and I've passed this information to many of my communities that I'm working with, saying, they're saying, oh, I'm going to put this on our website, and it's available, it's free, and we're very excited about that. So that's it. I'm out of time. Any questions? I guess
Just because of the time, but we can keep it open for questions.
Okay. Can I?
How many people are employed at RCAP right now?
That's a good question. We're always adding staff. In fact, we're looking for a person in New York right now. So within our agency of the Northeast, we have about, give or take, 30 field staff that are doing water and wastewater. Nationally, we probably have about 300 to 400.
How many of them are chemists, or do you hire the scientists, engineers outside as a consultant or something?
Can you repeat the questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, he asked how many staff did we have at RCAP Solutions, and that's about 30. But then nationally, we have about 300 to 400. What was the second one?
Specifically about chemists. I teach chemistry. I just when you mentioned chemists, it seems like chemists would be part of that. But how many? One? Or
Oh no, it just, we're always looking, it's not a job for fresh out of college. So everybody has some experience. The experience would vary from, the one guy with flat chemistry for a while. And so, and some people work as planners, or the guy that we're interviewing has done lots of different things, so that's just what the background is. But really, there's a lot of training that's involved within the agency to do once you get there. But it is national, so anywhere. Oh no, it's a hard one.
I was just wondering if there's any point at which, if a community is not tending the safety of its water and it becomes a danger, a health issue for the population, is there any authority that can step in and say, okay, your time is up? Or
Now, if it's a municipal system
Yes.
already,
yes,
oh, yes, you know, the health department inspects. I'm sorry. Is there any way that in communities that run a system that might be in dire need of replacement or fixing up, can be forced to do it? And the health department inspects those every year or every other year, depending on their workload. And so they will cite violations, and if it's serious enough, they will give them a timetable of compliance. And, you know, I know from working in the health department, sometimes that timetable of compliance gets extended because they need the money and they need help getting the money. And so, you know, sometimes it's extended until they can get the money to do the improvement.
thank you.
Sure.
There's one question on the chat. If you want to just read, we can all read that.
Oh, how are your services funded? That's an easy one. That we have three major funders: USDA Rural Development, Department of Health and Human Services, and the Environmental Protection Agency are the three major funders. And
I think that's it.
GIS, they're just defining GIS. Why don't, okay. I don't know where the tanks are. Pine Hill, good. Yes, we do pay a water bill. I think that's it.
Okay.
Did I say, okay, thank you.
Can I have your microphone for a second?
Oh, what is GIS? Somebody else has.
All right, thank you all for coming, and thank you, Kathy, that was great. There's all kinds of things going off on my mind, as you mentioned, so many different things. I just want to say also that if you had a schedule for the whole series, the next two talks are switched. So the schedule originally said that Elena Gisha was going to speak next week and Martha Buckwalter Davis the week after. They've switched. So next week will be Martha Buckwalter Davis in person and on Zoom, but she'll also be here. And then the following week will be Elena Gisha, and she will be just on Zoom. So again, those of you here, let's thank Kathy again, and thank you all in Zoom land for coming.